the value of serving. Over the next 3 weeks, we're going to cover 3 values that are important to us as a church community. One is serving, one is honouring one another, and the other one is giving and generosity. Okay? Serving, honouring one another, giving and generosity. We want to talk about these things because we believe that Jesus taught these things, and as reflections and as followers of him, we want to do these things in our lives as well. So there's this verse in the Bible from Galatians 5 verse 13. I'm actually going to preach from John chapter 13. So if you have a Bible, we're going to read that together in a moment. But there's this great verse in the Bible in Galatians 5:13, and it sums up the heart of what that value of service, what I want it to be in our church community. Okay? When people look at us as a community, I want them to say of us that there is a community that serve one another humbly in love. That serve one another humbly in love. That's what my desire for us as a church community. There are 3 key things in there. There's the word serve that we're going to talk about a lot this morning. There's the word humility, and then there's the word love. Those 3 things are there within that verse. And as we look at the Acts 2 community that we see in the Bible, we see a group of Christ followers. We see them loving and serving one another. We see that clearly there. And we're going to read John chapter 13 together. John chapter 13 is the story in the Bible where Jesus washes his disciples' feet. And at the end of that chapter, Jesus says these words to his disciples, okay? He says to them, "A new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this all men will know you are my disciples if you love one another." You see, this morning, church, part of our evangelism strategy of reaching the world for Jesus, according to Jesus, is that as we love one another, as other men see that, they will then know that we are followers of Jesus. If we will know in our lives and in our church community, the person sat in front of you, the person sat behind of you, maybe the person that you maybe don't really hit it off with, the person that you really hit it off with, if we know what it is to have this attitude towards one another, Jesus says that other people out there will know that we are followers of him by the way that we love one another. So Life Church, this morning, serve one another humbly in love. And that's what Jesus did. Okay, John chapter 13 then. If you've got a Bible, we're going to read it together. Okay, Jesus has been with his disciples for 3 years. Okay, everyone say 3 years. 3 years. Okay, that's about as long as we've been together as a Life Church community. Those of you who are here right at the start. Just over 3 years we've been walking together. So he'd been with them for 3 years. And then this incident happens with Jesus and his disciples. So there's Jesus in the room and his 12 followers are with him. And they're going to have a meal together. And then we see what happens. Okay, so John chapter 13. The Bible says it was just before the Passover feast. Jesus knew that the time had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he now showed them the full extent of his love. Jesus was going to now, in these next few verses, he was going to show his disciples how much he loved them. And he was going to do that by serving them in an extraordinary way. Okay? Verse 4. The evening meal was being served, and the devil had already prompted Judas to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, and that he had come from God and was returning to God. So he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, and wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into the basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus replied, "You do not realize now what I am doing, but later you will understand." "No," said Peter, "you shall never wash my feet." Jesus answered, unless I wash you, you have no part in me. Then Lord, Simon Peter replied, not just my feet, but my hands and my head too. Jesus answered, a person who has had a bath needs only to wash his feet. His whole body is clean, and you are clean, though not every one of you. For he knew who was going to betray him, and that is why he said not every one of you was clean. When he had finished washing their feet, he put on his clothes and returned to his place. Do you understand what I have done for you? He asked them. You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you. I tell you the truth, no servant is greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. Now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them. So Jesus does this. He serves. Jesus knew what it was to serve those who were closest to him in humility and in love. So, first thing, there's 4 things to draw from this passage that I want to encourage us about in terms of serving one another. And serving can mean all kinds of things. Okay, this morning we've been served in many ways. But by no way is our service limited to this. We can, like tomorrow, as you roll out of bed and your feet hit the floor and you're like, well, Lord, how do you want me to serve people today? Okay, serving isn't limited to Sunday, but we thank God for those who do serve our community so well on a Sunday. But it links right across our lives. Okay, so first thing is Jesus grasped the opportunity to serve others. Jesus looks for those who will pick stuff up, okay? So here was the basin, and here was the pitch of water, and it was there. It was there by the door. And the picture is that as they came together for a meal on that evening, as they would have walked into the room, normally what would have happened is there would have been a foot washer there. There was a servant or a slave whose job it was to wash the feet of those guests that were coming to the house, in order that as they lay down on the seats, like in a vertical way, a horizontal way, what they would do is that their feet would almost kind of be up at the table. So it was important that people had clean feet. And so there was a basin and a jug by the door, and imagine the scene. Okay, the first disciple comes in. He's the first there. He notices that who was ever down to wash the feet of the guests hadn't arrived. So what does he do? He looks at the water, he looks at the pitcher, he ignores it, and he thinks, well, that's not my job. That's for someone else to do. And he goes and he sits down. And then the second foot washer comes in. The second disciple comes in, notices there's no foot washer by the door. And so he's thinking, well, that's not my job either. I can see that my friend's already taken the most important position. So rather than pausing to do anything else, I just need to get sat down. Because it's important that I have the most prominent place next to where Jesus is. And so this happens. Disciple after disciple, they pass the basin and they pass the pitcher. They ignore it. They leave it exactly where it is. Because each one of them walks past it and just says, it's not my job. It's not my position. I am not a slave. I'm not a servant. I'm a disciple of Jesus. Do you not know who I am? And they pass the basin by. But you see, Jesus is different. When Jesus saw this need, rather than ignoring it, we see that Jesus grasped the opportunity to serve those around him. He doesn't ignore the opportunity, but he grasped it. Believe it or not, Jesus was not on a rota that morning for washing feet. He wasn't on a schedule. He hadn't received an email to say, it's your turn, Jesus, to wash people's feet. No, as he walked past the pitcher that evening, he picked it up because he saw there was an opportunity to wash the feet of his friends. And the Bible says he poured the water into the basin. It's such a simple act to do. But in order to pour the water into the basin, in order to even begin to serve that community that he was part of, he had to pick something up. No picking up, no serving, no washing feet. And my first simple question to all of us this morning is, what have you picked up? What do you carry for Jesus? How is it in your life that sometimes you're inconvenienced in order that those around you can be served and blessed? When is it that you do something that you don't get paid for, but you do it out of a desire to serve others because you're grateful for what Christ has done for you? We have been loved so much. The Bible says, how great is the love the Father has lavished on us, that we should be called the children of God. And that is what we are. And now, as followers of Christ, we have this opportunity to pick things up for Him. And let me tell you, church, like, our heart as a church community is to be a church that plants churches. That's what we do. That's what we believe that God has called us to do. God hasn't called us to simply sit in this room, but He's called also some of us to carry on sitting here, and please carry on sitting here. But some of you, God's calling you to go and plant a church somewhere else. And as you know, at Lim, every Sunday evening, there's a gathering there. And as you know, next year in Warrington West, we want to plant another church. Let me tell you that in terms of practically, on a Sunday, we need everyone to consider serving. Only a little bit. We're not going to burden anyone. You know, Jesus didn't wash feet every day. He did it when there was a need to do it. And as people move on, as people move in, there's going to be gaps. And we need us as a church community to be those that put our hand up and say, yeah, we'll serve. We'll pick something up. We'll take responsibility for something, Lucas, and we'll make sure that thing happens because we want to pick something up and we want to serve others. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that Jesus, in serving, did not fear vulnerability. I think sometimes we choose not to serve or do particular jobs like foot washing, and we don't do those things because if we're honest, we feel that kind of makes us a little bit vulnerable, and it might not really be our thing, yeah? It might. And let's be honest, that's why none of the other disciples that day picked up the pitcher and the basin, because none of them really felt it was their thing. Because they knew that if they were going to wash their friends' feet, then they would have to be a little vulnerable and maybe almost semi-naked in front of their friends. The Bible says in verse 4 of the chapter we read together that Jesus got up from the meal, he took off his outer clothing, and he wrapped a towel around his waist. See, Jesus was not afraid for people to see the real him. He was not afraid to be vulnerable. He wasn't afraid to take off his clothes in order that he might wash the feet of his fellow disciples. You see, washing feet was a messy thing. It wasn't something that was easy to do. There would be water splashed everywhere. And so the reason why Jesus took off his outer garment was that he would be in a position in order to serve those around him well. But you know what? I think Jesus was so secure in who he was that he was not afraid to be vulnerable before others. He wasn't afraid of his disciples thinking, wow, Jesus, I thought you were the Son of God. How comes you're washing people's feet? Maybe you're not the real deal. But you know what? Jesus was so secure in who he was that he was happy to take a lower place and to be perceived by some as being just a foot washer. And we know this by verse 3, because verse 3 in the text that we've read together, it says this, just talking about the fact that Jesus was secure and knew who he was, okay? Verse 3, the Bible says Jesus knew, first of all, the Bible says Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his feet, okay? Put all things under his power. So Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power. He was secure in that. That wasn't a negotiable. That was the position that the Father had given to him. And also the Bible says in that verse that Jesus knew that he had come from God and was returning back to God. He was really secure in his relationship with God. Okay? And then as a result of that, verse 3 steps into verse 4. Because because he knew that the Father had put all things under his power, and because he knew he'd come from God and was returning to God, so he got up from the meal, took out his outer clothing and wrapped the towel around his waist. You see, Jesus knew who he was. Okay? Listen, you need to be reminded this morning of who you are. You are a child of God. You are a daughter of the King this morning. You have been redeemed. You've been forgiven. Your eternal destiny is safe in what Christ has done for you. Okay? How great is the love the Father has lavished on us that we should be called the children of God. Okay? So you don't have to worry about what people think about you. Okay? If you do a menial job in serving others, great. Okay? That pleases the heart of God. It shows the authenticity of this faith that you have in following Jesus. So when we come to serve sometimes, it does take humility and vulnerability, and people see us as we are. But this morning, church, that is good. It's good. So don't be afraid to be vulnerable. Third thing is this: Jesus touched others in community. The Bible says that Jesus began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. I know quite often in life we like our personal space, and we like space away from others, and we don't sometimes like to get into the nitty and gritty of life with others. We just say, just give me some space. But what the washing of the disciples' feet that day, it meant that Jesus, the Son of God, had to come into physical contact with like dirty feet, muddy feet that had been walking along dusty tracks. And, Jesus didn't shy away from that. Jesus was willing to embrace that. It wasn't something that put him off. And, sometimes when we serve others, when we give our lives to serving in a ministry or reaching out to a particular group of people, sometimes things aren't always clinically clean. Sometimes things are messy. Like our lives are messy. Sometimes people make mistakes. They disappoint us. Sometimes heaven forbid, we can even sweat as we serve Jesus, doing the things that he's called us to do. Yeah? Sometimes that happens. But you know what? Jesus wasn't afraid of the sweat. He wasn't afraid of the dirt. He wasn't afraid of, sorry to be gross, but he wasn't afraid of getting in between the toes. That stuff that kind of just gathers naturally in between your toes, yeah? It's just there, isn't it? It's like belly button fluff. It just appears. It's just a miracle of life. Like, where does it come from? Those deposits. But Jesus wasn't afraid of that. Jesus didn't do it from a distance, but Jesus came close. Jesus came close. Jesus began to sweat. Jesus had a towel around his waist. He got down. He got into it. And I want us as a church community to not be those who are afraid to touch the lives of others, to physically help others. Sometimes, you might feel that others aren't as hygienic as you. That's okay. But God calls us to serve them and to touch their lives. Jesus did a complete job. He did not hold back. Okay? And however we choose to serve Jesus as we live our lives for him, either within this community or as we live our lives every day, sometimes it can be dirty, sometimes it can be messy, but if Jesus did it, then he calls us also to do it this morning. And then the final thing this morning is this, that Jesus offered no one immunity. Jesus offered no one immunity. Everyone was the same. And Jesus made the statement very clearly. Okay? Jesus was saying to his disciples that day, listen, boys, if you are a follower of me, I expect all of you to do as I have done. Some of the words are on the screen, but Jesus says to his disciples in verses 13 and 14 of this chapter, he says, you call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you. Jesus keeps it really simple. The problem when Jesus keeps it really simple, There's nothing complicated to hide behind. There's nothing to hide behind. There's no way that any of us sat in the room today could actually say, well, actually, Jesus, you don't really mean me. You just mean everyone else. No, I'll read it again to you. Jesus says to them, you call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also need to wash one another's feet. I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you. You see, there was no immunity. Like Abigail and Lois, when we're about to send the kids off to bed, they always reach for immunity. Like, yeah, Dad, that doesn't count for us, does it? You know, so 8 o'clock, Abigail, Phoebe, Elizabeth, you know, go to bed now, Abigail, let's go to bed. You know, but it's not time for us. What you've just said, Dad, it doesn't count for us because our time is 9 o'clock. You know, we're trying to there's that immunity. We think maybe it's not really for us. But when Jesus says these words, he's speaking to everyone. If you say that you're a follower of Jesus, then Jesus expects you to wash feet, okay? Interesting, Jesus was not looking for a returned favour, okay? Quite often when we do something, we serve someone else, we think, okay, well, there can be the thought in our mind that actually what they'll do is they'll serve us back, okay? Jesus wasn't saying to his disciples that day, listen, boys, I've washed your feet, okay, now you can wash my feet. I'm sure there isn't a person in the room who wouldn't be willing to wash the feet of Jesus if he was sat right here with us now. The amazing thing is in Matthew 25, where Jesus talks about those who need a cup of water, those who are naked, those who are in prison, all of these different people that are in need. When Jesus talks to them, he says that whatever you did for the least of these, you did it for me. The truth is that when we serve others, we are, in a roundabout way, serving and washing the feet of Jesus. Okay, that's what we're doing. When you serve someone, you're washing the feet of Jesus. When our kids workers, they look after our kids and they bless them and they disciple and they teach and they're washing the feet of Jesus. You know, we have teams of people that get here at 9 o'clock in the morning to make church happen on a Sunday. You know what they're doing? Is they're washing the feet of Jesus. When those guys on a Tuesday night prepare that community meal and just invite the community in to come and eat dinner with them, you know what they're doing? They're washing the feet of Jesus. Those of you on that Eden team, when you're out on those streets and doing that outreach stuff and sharing with people about Jesus, just serving our community, you know what you're doing? You're washing the feet of Jesus. Our team of musicians here, as they practice and as they serve us with music, what they're doing is they're washing the feet of Jesus. That's what God calls his church to do. And it's for all of us this morning. And an amazing thing is that one of the pairs of feet that Jesus washed that day was Judas. How amazing is that? That Judas was in the room that day. And it would have been so easy for Jesus to look at Judas and say, Judas, I know what you're going to do in the next couple of hours to me. And I know that you're going to betray me. So I'll just be leaving your feet for now. And I'll get on with washing the feet of the rest of the disciples. But you know what? Jesus doesn't. And again, there's such a lesson to us in that God doesn't call us to be choosy in whom we serve. It doesn't matter how much you like me or you don't like me this morning. I trust I'm mostly liked. But, okay, God calls you to wash my feet. It doesn't really matter what I feel about you. That if I want to be a follower of Christ, I need to wash your feet. I need to serve you. I can never say to you, no, I can't do that for you because I'm a bit upset with you. I don't really like you. And I don't like what you've done or what you're going to do. You see, Jesus washed Judas's feet. And that is the Spirit of Christ that I want us to have. I wonder if Andy, if you just come and play for us. I'll just remind you this morning of the verse that I spoke over us at the start, okay? I have a picture of a community that knows what it is to do this. A community that knows what it is to serve one another humbly in love. Okay, that is the community that I want to be part of. I don't want to be part of that community because it makes life easy for us, particularly. The reason I want to be part of that community, 2 reasons. First of all, I want to reflect the character of Christ in who we are together as a church. We are followers of Jesus, and our number one aim in life is to become more and more like him, okay? So that's what I want to do. And secondly, I think it's a great evangelistic strategy for our church. Okay? If we know what it is to serve one another humbly in love, I believe that as we serve one another humbly in love and as we serve the world we live in humbly and in love, I believe that that will speak volumes of what Christ feels about them and what Christ has already done for them.